Good afternoon and welcome to the Art Museum of West Virginia University and our monthly program, Lunchtime Looks. We're so happy to have you here to get a closer look at one of the items in our collection and to hear a little bit more about the career journey of my colleague, Madelyn Brodie. Madelyn Brodie holds an MA in art history from West Virginia University, where last spring she was awarded the Outstanding Mentored Graduate Research Award. And she was also the Jacknowitz Summer Intern at the Art Museum of West Virginia University last summer, where she was able to learn things about collections management and curatorial practice. And excitingly, we have then been able to parlay that into a position as the program coordinator at the Art Museum of WVU. And I can just say from my personal experience working with Madelyn, she has been a true gift to this institution, and she builds our capacity to be able to offer robust educational programming to a wide variety of diverse audiences. So we're very excited to have her here with us today and to hear what she has to say about this Mark Messersmith piece. Please join me in welcoming Madelyn.
Thank you for that introduction, Heather. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you guys today about this piece by Mark Messersmith. So my name is Madelyn Brodie, and I'm the program coordinator here at the Art Museum. And this past summer, I was fortunate enough to be selected as the 2022 Jacknowitz Summer Intern. Throughout this internship, I had the opportunity to learn about a lot of different disciplines in museum practice, such as curation, registration, and education. And my experience provided me with a more comprehensive view of exhibition planning as well. So after my time as the intern, I was hired as the program coordinator at the museum, and I have worked closely with the curator of education, Heather Harris, to organize, do research for, create tour plans, and give tours as well. So today I'd like to talk about my experience both as the intern and as the program coordinator, and also about how I use this piece in tour plans. So my internship started as what I think was a really great time in the museum schedule to learn about the different museum departments. So the museum runs on a university schedule, which means that in the spring and fall we have new exhibits. So the summer and winter breaks are when the exhibits get rotated through. Because of this, I got to work with all the different departments the whole way through when the exhibitions were being transitioned. So I got to see the work as it came in. I worked with the registrar, Karen Luvar, to unpack work and document work through condition reports. I also got to work with curator Bob Bridges to do a lot of the curatorial process, and I also got to see how the works were prepared for installation. And so throughout this process, I was also researching the artists and the artworks in the exhibitions, both to get a better idea of how artwork would be set up, but also to be able to write labels and give tours eventually at the end of the summer, and also currently in my job. So the Diversi Animali exhibit, Diversi Animali meaning various animals in Latin, features the work of the museum's collection to survey animals across time, medium, style, and cultures. And the Art Museum worked with the WVU Natural History Museum to create a multidisciplinary experience within the gallery through the use of taxidermy animals. So we actually have 3 animals. You can see the crow up here. We have a coyote in the corner over there, and then we have an owl over there. Yes, the owl has a mouse as well. And I really enjoy the inclusion of the taxidermy animals because I think it gives a really fun feel to the exhibit, and every school group that has come through has been really sort of enamored with these facets as well. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the exhibition. The exhibition has some works by Appalachian artists like Charlie Kinney, Oscar Spencer, who has you can't see it from here, but he has these amazing carved snakes that crawl up the wall. Minnie Atkins, who carves animals in a really playful style. And then Elijah Pierce, who has a sculpture of a cow as well. So this wall here has a lot of our bird artworks. On the other side of the window alcove, we have 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional bird artworks from different cultures and styles. I think that's a really interesting part of the gallery as well. And then in the far corner, we have some mythological and fantastical animals, which I thought was a fun inclusion. So the process of deciding where the work fit best within the physical space and in regard to each other was something that was probably my favorite part of the internship this summer, getting to learn about how artwork communicated and setting up a gallery. So I worked with Bob Bridges, like I was saying, to learn more about curation and to implement my learning into an actual gallery atmosphere. So before we moved any of the work into the gallery, we were able to work with a model that was sized to scale, and we printed all of the photos of all the objects that were going to be in the show. And this really helped us decide sort of where things were going to be so that when we actually moved into the gallery, we had a good idea. This was more of a preliminary idea. As we moved the works in, we actually moved quite a bit around to try to get things to communicate better with each other and really enhance the viewer experience. But ultimately, I think we came up with some pretty great placements of works. Some of my favorite groupings in the show are, we have Oscar Spencer's snakes running up the wall, and actually above that piece we have the taxidermy owl. And that kind of gives an interesting prey and predator dynamic that you wouldn't have gotten if it was just the snakes. So I think that that one was really interesting. And then another one of my favorite placements was Sue Koh's Judgment at No Burger, which is a print that comments on the food industry and animal treatment within the food industry. And we have situated that piece with Elijah Pierce's cow and John Hitchcock's pork screen print. So that's like kind of a tongue-in-cheek, kind of funny grouping that we came up with. But this piece, Mark Messersmith's Moonbeams, it was decided that this piece would be sort of the first piece you saw when you came into the exhibit. And the size of the piece alone and all of its three-dimensional attributes definitely make it a spectacle and make it a great first piece. And I think that it really introduces the rest of the exhibit nicely because you see all of the different animal interactions, and that's really sort of what we want you to see in the gallery as well. It was also decided that the paint color for this wall and then for the two pedestals were going to be based off of this purple color in the sky here. And I think that also reinforces the idea that this is sort of the anchor piece as you're coming into the gallery. I'd like to do a little bit of a close look at the work. So when I first saw this piece, for the first few times actually, I noticed that each time I looked at it, I would discover new things because there really is so much going on and it is a very complex composition. But first, the first thing that caught my eye was the fox in the center. And the artist does this intentionally. He situates the fox in the center, which draws your eye in, but then he also uses complementary colors, the orange in the fox in contrast with the blues sort of in the rest of the piece to really draw your eye in. Another thing that he does is he uses his expressionistic style to create a very intense look on the fox's face. We see him snarling. So it really does bring your eye in. That was the first thing that I really noticed. But after I saw the fox, I started to look around at the other aspects of the piece. I started to notice the birds, the moths, the possum, and then more of the human-made objects in the piece. Light plays an interesting role in this piece. So the main light source comes from the upper right-hand corner of the painting. Presumably this is moonlight, considering that the piece is entitled Moonbeams. But I think that light sort of skews where you see illuminated aspects and sort of furthers this idea of the chaotic composition. I wanted to talk a little bit too about the inspirations behind Mark Messersmith's painting. So one of his inspirations was medieval illuminated manuscripts, and I've included a photo on your handouts. It should be on the front page, first image.
If you want to go into the stool so you can grab an image, you're more than welcome. Thanks, Ellen.
So Messersmith really likes these illuminated manuscripts because he really likes the duality of them. He finds them beautiful, and they're beautifully adorned aspects, but then the subject matter is kind of sinister and conflicting with the visual appearance. And so he actually views his paintings in a similar way. He's described them as beautiful but dark. So his color choices serve to like highlight this dissonance between the beautiful scene and then like the fox in the middle who seems a little bit more on edge. Messersmith further references medieval art in his works by the inclusion of these boxes at the bottom. These were inspired by predella boxes, and predella boxes were usually located at the foot of medieval altarpieces, and the purpose of them was to include objects that reflected the meaning of the painting up in the altar, so he's included some of that. Here we can see a bird with a fishing lure. We have some birds with a billboard, and then here I've actually included a photo of this on your paper, but a human eye watching over a fox as he sleeps. So all of these serve to reinforce the idea of humans sort of encroaching on the natural landscape. So Messersmith considers the 3D aspects of this piece, like the fox at the top, the carved birds and fishing lures, and the predella box at the bottom, to be folk art, and he considers them to be folk art because of the materials that he uses, so the wood and then the found objects, but then also he uses box cutters and whittling knives to carve these. So because of this, because of the availability of materials to most people, he considers them to be folk art. So now that we've seen sort of the main aspects of the piece, I'd like to talk about how we teach this piece. So as I mentioned, another one of my jobs as the intern this summer was to write labels for the work in the Diversi Animali show. And I was able to choose a few pieces that really stuck out to me, and this was one of them. So the activity that we use for this piece really draws on different learning modalities, the tour plan we use, the activity we use is supposed to cater to different learning modalities. So we use visual learning, obviously, when you're looking at a work, but we also implement an activity that caters to audio types of learning in order to not only cater to students that maybe aren't as visually geared, but also to give students new ways of looking at the art that maybe they wouldn't have had if they didn't have the audio. So the first thing we do is we play 2 different songs for students. I'm actually going to play them for you in a second, but while we're playing these pieces of music, we ask students to consider which piece matches best with the composition and what they're seeing. So the first piece we play is a song called Spring by Vivaldi. So I'm going to play a clip of that now. And while you're listening, think about whether or not you think this piece matches the composition. All right, so that was the first piece. Does anybody have any adjectives that they would use to describe that piece of music? Sydney? Cheerful, okay. Anybody else? Joyful? Yeah, I agree, definitely cheerful and joyful. So, bright, yes. So the next piece we play is called Night on Bald Mountain by a composer named Mussorgsky, and we'll play that now. Oh, nope. So after listening to both of those pieces, we asked the students which one we think matches the composition better. So does anybody have any ideas which they think? Yes?
I think the second one.
Okay. Does everybody agree with that? Yeah.
I'd like to know why she thinks that.
Okay.
I've been using that's what I was saying.
Why do I think that?
Yeah.
Because the second one was more suspenseful and scary, and I feel like that really fits with what's going on in this art piece. That makes sense. I was just thinking that it would be easy for people to have different opinions.
Yeah, so when we've actually done this, we have had students that have said either or have said both, and while most people do think that it's the second one, as long as the students are able to sort of back up why they think the first song, that's totally valid. But what we're really interested in is allowing students to see the connections between the music and the work. And so, for example, a student that maybe didn't have a big art vocabulary or didn't really understand any technical aspects about the art, by listening to the music, they can pick things out like, oh, that second song was chaotic and suspenseful, and here we have this fox that looks on edge. We also try to engage students in a close look of the work by implementing visual thinking strategies, which is an inquiry-based method of teaching that allows students to form their own ideas and observations through prompting using open-ended questions. So generally these questions are very broad and don't have any right answers, but the purpose of the questions is to engage the students in a dialogue about the artwork. So when framing the questions, usually in a tour I will start out with more surface level questions about the visual aspects of the piece. So the first question I might ask is, when you look at this painting, what do you see? Of course, students might have a range of different things that stick out to them, but generally, the first thing that everyone says is, oh, I see a fox, or an angry-looking fox. And as an instructor, this answer might prompt me to say, if they said that they saw an angry-looking fox, I might say, okay, well, what about the piece makes you think that this fox is angry? And just by making the observation that the fox is angry, the student has inferred something about the subject matter based on the visual clues in the painting, like the overlapping compositions, the angry gestural rendering of the fox's face. And so from there, the students might have a conversation about the fox, what the fox is feeling, and this conversation might keep going until either I or one of them notices this right here. So usually I'll point this out if they don't see it, but this is actually an animal trap on the fox's leg. So after that has been pointed out, the next series of questions might be, okay, well now that you see that there is a trap on the leg, what do you think the fox is feeling now? So maybe the answer would go from angry to something like scared or in pain. So from there, we would synthesize these answers that the students have given into question about the meaning of the piece. So I might ask, well, how do you think the trap got there? And hopefully, in all of the tours, this has led to a conversation about humans' impact on the natural world and on animals and environments. So I also want to talk a little bit more about the artist and the background of this work. So Mark Messersmith is a contemporary artist from northern Florida. He was a professor at the University of, now I'm missing it. University of Florida or Florida State, I can't remember now. But while his work focuses on environmental topics, he does not consider himself to be an activist artist. He doesn't consider himself to be an activist because, in an interview, he said that the primary reason that he creates paintings is because he enjoys it more so than like actually forcing the audience to do something with the work. He also noted in an interview that his work isn't as overtly political as some of the other activist artists, and also interestingly, he referenced the artist Sue Ko as an example of extremist art, and I put an image on your handouts of the piece that we actually have of Sue Ko in this very show. The print is entitled Judgment at Neuberger, and the label text for this work reads, Sue Ko makes prints and paintings as a form of social protest. In this print, Ko promotes animal rights through a critique of the meat industry by fabricating a courtroom trial scene with animals as stand-ins for humans. The title of the work references a 1961 film about the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, Germany, which tried and prosecuted Nazi war criminals following World War II. So here, Sukkot is condemning large food corporations for their treatment of animals and relates them to Nazi-like entities. So Messersmith would consider this type, or Sukkot's type of work, as being more intense and activism-centered. And while he doesn't really consider his work activism, he does hope that as you look at his work, you consider your role in the environment and in relation to nature. So this type of environmental work can be situated amongst a long and ongoing art historical tradition of environmentally conscious artwork, and can also be situated in the context of environmental artwork today. I decided to focus my time on this piece specifically because of my own interest in environmental art. Last year I was finishing my master's thesis, and my artwork looked at 3 artists from the late 19th to early 20th centuries, and how their artwork influenced legislation to protect national parks lands. So his work and his overlapping of environmental art was very interesting to me. But also, the artists that I covered in my thesis were inspired by artists like Frederick Church and Thomas Moran, and it just so happens that Mark Messersmith's inspirations are also, well, 2 of them are Edward Church and Thomas Moran. And they have very romanticized paintings, and Messersmith tries to incorporate this sort of beauty into his own work when he's painting nature. So Mark Messersmith, potentially one of the reasons that he paints about environmental topics is because of the environmental occurrences that he has experienced in his home state of Florida. So I'm sure we all know this past September, there was a Category 4 hurricane, Hurricane Ian, that came through and was actually the deadliest in 80 years, and it created millions of tons of debris. The debris alone would be a significant concern and would be something that Mark Messersmith would potentially paint about because of the pollution and the effect on habitats that it would have. And then another environmental occurrence in Florida that Mark Messersmith has likely been inspired by would be the rising sea levels, and this is due to humans' interaction with the land, causing global warming, ice caps melting, and rising sea levels from the flooding. I also included on the very last image, work of contemporary artist Zaria Foreman, who does hyper-realistic pastel paintings inspired by her trips with NASA to Greenland and Antarctica, where she's documented the receding ice caps. And like Messersmith, her goal is to create these beautiful scenes that cause humans to sort of step back and consider their interaction with the world and their impact on it. So this exhibition highlights the use of animals across time, culture, and style, and in this exhibit, animals are used to depict cultural imagery, fantastical folklore, and societal criticisms. So along with the other artists in this exhibit, Messersmith uses the animals in his artwork as a means with which to help us to consider something about our humanity and our role in the world and our relationship to the world and the animals around us.
Thank you, Madelyn. That was wonderful, and I think it really helped us to see this work of art in a different light. So I forgot to mention at the top of the hour, we are not live streaming this event, but we are recording it so that it can be posted to our YouTube channel later. I am lucky now in that I've been given a movable microphone. So instead of having to repeat your questions into the microphone, I can hand the microphone to you. And also curb anyone's anxiety about coming up here, which I've invited people to do at our last few sessions to no avail. So we do have some time for Q&A with Madelyn, and if you have a question for her, if you just raise your hand and I will pass you the microphone and avoid any awkward repetitions. Anybody have any questions for Madelyn? Yes.
Thank you very much, Madelyn. That was excellent. I'm curious to know a couple of things. One is what works have the kids been drawn to on your tours? I'm sure they love the one you were just speaking about, but are there others?
Yeah, so sorry, I realized I don't need the microphone. So yes, obviously this piece, I think, just because of its size and all the colors, but they also really love Minnie Adkins' wood carving of the tie ox, and also the snakes going up the wall by Oscar Spencer. That's been a crowd favorite for sure.
Just a follow-up question, and then I'll pass on the mic. But because I have the advantage of knowing that you yourself are a painter as well, how does that inform your work here at the museum, either in terms of the curatorial work for this show or in your tours with the students?
Sure. I think that my background as an artist helps me to describe the ways that artists either make the work or yeah, basically just how they make the work. The other day, a student was asking me about like how an artist like this would paint with these brush strokes. So I was able to kind of walk through that process with them. And then this past summer, as I was working with Bob to sort of figure out where artworks would go, I would say that I'd like to think I have a nice artistic eye. So sort of using that to see sort of what worked and what didn't was helpful. Yeah.
Yes, Jason.
I'm sort of curious also about kids' reactions, and I'm wondering, in your conversations about this piece with children, if they've come up with any interesting stories about what's happening as far as the interaction between the fox and the other characters in the piece.
Yeah, so usually that sort of conversation comes very early in our time looking at the piece. They usually say, oh, like the fox is really mad at the crane, or the birds are flying around trying to eat the fox. But that's a big one we get. But usually once we start pointing out like the fishing lures and the ropes that bind the bird's legs and the trap, they start to sort of change their interpretations to address humans' interaction.
Any other questions?
Can you talk about the wires or whatever's in front of the piece and the birds and the significance, or what? I don't know if you spoke to that, and if you
Sure.
could, that would be great.
Yeah, so I would say the main reason that Messersmith is including like this wire here with the fishing lures, on a compositional level, I would say that it reinforces this overlapping composition so that it really brings it into the space. But I would also say that it leads into the subject matter as well, so by including these human-made objects within this realm of the animals, it really does drive home the idea that humans are sort of encroaching on the natural world. Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Okay, well, I want to thank Madelyn once again. As I said, it has been a true gift to have her develop from being a student and a graduate assistant to a colleague, and she has made that leap in a beautiful way, and we're so grateful to have her here. I'd like to give a plug for our final Lunchtime Looks of the semester, which will be on Friday, December 2nd. I've once again got another of my colleagues on the hook, like the fishing lures over there. Robert Bridges will be talking about the latest iteration of our Blanche Lizelle Encounters exhibition that details her time in the artist colonies of Birdcliff and Provincetown. So that's December 2nd at noon. Once again, it will be an in-person event with a video available later. And also our Art Museum Family Day is tomorrow from 12:30 to 3. The students in my Museums in Action class, some of whom are here today, have planned a menu of activities for adults and children to engage in the galleries. We have art making activities, scavenger hunts, button making, blanket stacking competitions, and much, much more. So we hope to see you, and also hot chocolate and cookies. So we hope to see you tomorrow and on December 2nd as we round out the semester's offerings at the Art Museum of West Virginia University. Thank you for joining us.